Caleb and Steve, how are you?
Doing great.
Fantastic. Steve, I'll unmute you there. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you muted.
Perfect. Thanks for joining me and Bronco Nation. Thanks for joining us today for our first virtual lecture, Lessons from Space Quarantine with our special guest, Steve Swanson. My name is Matthew Ewing, Vice President for Advancement at Boise State University. This is our first ever for the university virtual lecture, specifically designed for members of our Boise State Alumni Association. We're joined today by, looks like we've got 71 that have signed up so far. We had over 200 RSVPs, so we'll probably have folks making their way in as we dive into the lecture. And when I say Bronco Nation, I mean the nation. We've got folks from Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, New York, North and South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, Washington, D.C., all over this nation. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. To all of you, Steve has put together an informative program that we're sure you'll find both educational and fascinating. Also joined today by Caleb Smith, our student body president. One of our goals with the virtual lecture series is to allow our alumni and our Broncos a chance to experience the Boise State online learning environment. Not unlike the experience that Caleb and all of our students at Boise State are going through right now as we've transitioned all of our courses online. So Caleb, I want to welcome you, give you a chance to introduce yourself and maybe provide the alumni here with us today some insights into how you and your fellow students are working to complete the semester.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And thank you, Steve, for being here as well. My name is Caleb. As Matthew already mentioned, I was the student body president, or am until about the end of the year. I'm also a graduating student this year. I'm graduating as a finance major with a minor in economics. I'm from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Boise State has been some of the best years of my life, to be honest. So it was quite a sudden change to going online. And Matthew's exactly right. This is exactly like how we learned as students over the past month. My teachers kind of went into Zoom calls and lectures and we figured it out, but we still learned the best we could without that sick in-person experience. And you know, a little bit of it was hard, especially since I'm graduating. I really wish I had that last month kind of on campus with my friends, with the people I love, especially in my position. I love the community and everything about it, but we've done our best to create an online experience that mirrors that of the in-person experience, and my teachers have been great at that. And yeah, so almost at the end, and I'm really happy I could be here today. So thank you all, and thank you, Matthew.
Great, thank you, Caleb. I know that like a lot of the high school students across the country that would be graduating, like a lot of the college students their senior year, certainly how you didn't foresee it ending. But I know you and I have had a lot of conversations, and you look forward to staying engaged as one of our alumnus and being that future leader. So we appreciate all you've done to date and what you'll do in the future. I'll also want to say thank you to all our alumni and donors that are joining us today. And for the generous support that you provide Boise State, especially during this critical time. Support like yours has helped Boise State respond quickly to the needs of our students through gifts to the Dean of Students Emergency Assistance Fund, as well as financial support of programs that have provided critical personal protection equipment for our community's first responders. Through our partnership with donors, alumni, and friends, we're all addressing the rapidly changing needs to provide outcomes in the best interest for the health and well-being of our community. And for that, we say thank you. Our goal is to make today's lecture interactive. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen that all of you have access to. And after Steve completes his lecture today, we'll have an opportunity to do some Q&A and answer some of those questions. So I encourage you throughout the lecture to go ahead and be feeding questions in there. And Caleb's going to be monitoring that, and we'll have some time at the end to to make this interactive just like a class. So you're turning into the professor today, Caleb, and flipping that classroom a little bit. Steve, again, we thank you so much for being here today. For those of you on the lecture today, Steve is a former NASA astronaut. During that career, he completed 5 spacewalks, totaling more than 28 hours, and accumulated more than 195 days in space. He's also has over 2,800 hours of aircraft flight time. Steve's time in space also included serving as the commander for the International Space Station and clocking millions of miles in space travel. Today, Steve serves Boise State as the distinguished educator in residence. We're lucky to have him here today, but we're certainly lucky to have him as a part of the Boise State family. So Steve, I'll kick this off to you. You know, like Caleb and all of our attendees today, I'm trying to do my part to physically distance. I'm working at home. You can see I'm in my, just outside my kitchen today, where I hold a lot of my Zoom meetings with colleagues, our supporters and family. I know how I'm feeling after 7 weeks of this. You spent 195 days isolated in space. Tell us about that isolation. How did you deal with staying busy, communicating back to your friends and family at Earth, and in general, maybe just having some fun while you're up there too?
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks for the introduction. Caleb, it's good to see you again. Yeah, it is very similar to what we're doing today, being in space in a way. It's just on a whole different scale, I would say, because here in Idaho, we're pretty lucky. We can go out for walks. We can get outside. You can still go to the grocery store. You can do all these kind of things. We do try to stay as isolated as possible, but in the space station, you can't go anywhere. You are stuck there, right? You're in a volume that's not that big, and you are going to stay there with your 5 friends, and hopefully you stay friends for the whole duration, and you're there that whole time. And so that aspect of it adds a little bit more to it, I think, than what we have down here on Earth. But we do use the same techniques, I think, to get through it, as you pointed out. One of the big ones, of course, for me was to keep busy. And on the space station, I didn't really have a chance not to be busy, because Houston, which is mission control, they would give us a schedule every day, and it would be jam-packed. We were working from 7:30 in the morning to 7:30 in the night every day, well, except for Sundays. We got that day off, right? But you're working a lot, and your schedule is busy, and so that kind of made the time go quickly. It didn't give you time to think about any kind of negative thoughts or anything like that going on, like I wish I was missing, I'm missing this, that, or whatever. Being busy was really helpful, I'll put it that way. And the second thing, though, I thought was really important to me was communication with family and friends. So we did have the ability to do email, when we also had the ability to make phone calls, kind of like a audio Skype call, right? And I could call people, but they couldn't call me because I didn't really have a number. That was kind of nice. And that was really actually very helpful. I would call at least 2 people every day. I kind of had a list of these people, good friends and family, that I would go work my way through and just get them to keep rotating and try to get 2 a day of that going. That really helped a lot. I got to do a video Skype with the family once a week, like over for at least an hour-long video Skype. That was really nice. And then I also did a Facebook page, which was a little different than maybe what you do here, but it was more about some good family and friends, and I would put pictures and stuff like that on it, and people would comment. We'd have jokes going back and forth, but I felt more connected to this whole group with that aspect of it. I really, there's pros and cons of social media, but for this time, it was really helpful for me to stay connected through the use of social media that way. But I think that connection was really, really great. Another thing for me is working out. I like to work out, so we had to do that on the space station. And then the other big thing I thought that was very helpful was just having fun. We scheduled fun. On a day off on Sunday, we would actually schedule time to get together and have fun. And we would set up cameras and we would just play on the space station, because it's a very unique environment. And so you could really have a lot of fun. And you had to be creative in this fun, because you had to come up with different games to play that you really wouldn't do down here on Earth, or things to do. So that was kind of, I think, an interesting thing to do, to have to be creative in your playtime also. And that really helped pass the time. It kind of reset us every week. We kind of got energized again with this playtime, this kind of all working together on that and having fun. It kind of, they helped us get ready for the week following, and kind of got our energy back for that work that we're going to have to do for the next week. I'd like to go into a little bit more detail because I have this little video here and a little picture about the space station. I can tell you kind of how we stayed busy, you know, kind of what we did for that. And you know, and then some of the other things for fun we did and that kind of stuff. If you're ready for that, I can get going on that.
Yeah, Steve, that's great. And, you know, just hearing you say that, even though we're here on Earth, and we've, as you said, we've got a little more access to getting out and doing some things. That sounds very similar to my day, and I imagine a lot of the folks here. So I think they'll be able to learn a lot here. So yeah, dive in.
Okay, I'm gonna start off. Share my screen real quick. There you go. That's a space station right now, an International Space Station. And it's an amazing vehicle. I really do think this is one of the greatest things man has produced in its time. And so, of course, I'm biased. I will admit that right away. But you know, being part of that was a really, to me, a fantastic thing. And I'm very proud of that aspect that I got to be part of the building this thing, got to be part of the whole project itself. Now, if you look from this view, though, you can't really see size as well. You know it's big, kind of. You don't really know much about it. And you don't know really like all the different pieces and how it was put together and stuff like that. So I like to show this next view, which is just a little bit different. And what it is a kind of a schematic blown up with all the pieces separated. It kind of show you how complex of a vehicle or assembly this was. You notice there's many different components. Those were all either brought up on a shuttle or a Russian rocket. It was 37 shuttle missions and 5 Russian rockets brought different pieces up. And from, I guess I would call it left to right. And you actually, it's a ship, so we actually use port and starboard. If you look real closely, you will see I'm using my cursor here. That's on S5, and S just stands for starboard. And so it's a 5th truss segment on the starboard side. And if you go over, you got P6, which is the port side, and that's a 6th truss segment on the port side. It's really kind of simple. And so this big long thing across the top that goes left to right is called the truss segment, and that's where the solar arrays are, the radiators are, but really it's all about power generation in that aspect of it. My first 2 shuttle missions, we brought up the solar arrays on the starboard side. We did the inboard one first, and my second shuttle mission, we did the outboard one. So that's kind of what I did. I built the space station, I built that part of it. I was really and I'm proud again to be part of that aspect of it. And it's from side to side there, it's over 110 meters in size from solar array to solar array, which is kind of amazing. And if you look at the habitable volume, which that's kind of like these things down here, and then it goes all the way to the Russian segment in the back. And that's about 80 meters long that way. And so the Russians in the back, this was the first thing to come up was a service module, or sorry, the FGB was first, service module was second. That's when the Russians launched those. And we paid for the FGB first, long story there. So that's how it started off. And then we went, the shuttle started coming up and do all these other pieces and put this thing together. And to me, one of the amazing things about the space station, it was never put together on the ground first because most of these parts were built in different parts of the world. And so in different countries, et cetera. And so the first time it was put together was in space and it all worked, it all fit together. And that's just to me, amazing engineering to be able to do that and have it all work, that aspect of it. Now, if you look at the volume, I know it's hard to tell like how much volume it has, but it is kind of the size of a 747. So that's how much volume is inside this vehicle, which you think that's a tremendous amount of volume, but we got to remember we have all our supplies, food, clothing, science experiments, spare equipment, everything also with us for at least like a year's worth of supplies and stuff with us on board. So it is also jam-packed with all sorts of things. So that does take up a lot of room at the same time, but we do have quite a bit of room on the space station. So it's not I say crowded at all for the total 6 of us that are normally on board the space station. You don't feel like you're claustrophobic or getting cramped in your space on the space station. So the solar arrays produce about 90 kilowatts of power, and we can actually go down to 3 of the 4 panels in case there's an emergency or in case something fails, I should say, and still do everything we need to do. So we have extra power on board just for emergency situations on that. So that's kind of the space station. And so now I would like to show you a little bit about, you say the busy schedule we had and what we did with that while we were on the space station. And Well, I'll start off with is science. And this was our main task, and this is why we built the space station, was to do science on board. And so here I am working on one experiment called SPHERES. And even though that is a sphere, it was an acronym for SPHERES. And Rita's helped me here. And we did many different experiments on board, over 300 of them. But this was a fun one for us to play with because we got to load it up and do all sorts of things and got to interact with it. We always like to interact more with this science if we could. That was always more fun for us than just setting it up and going away. So we like that aspect of it. So we did experiments, on many different things. And this is fluids, looking at different fluid dynamics. And I'll show you later some more fun with fluids we had, I'll call it that. But things behave much differently in this environment. So it was always fun to test different things. This is combustion or fire. And that was really interesting. I'm a male, I like playing with fire. I say anybody can probably like playing with fire. And it was really fun to do. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And we did many experiments on the human body. Here I'm taking measurements of the size of my muscles to see if I've had any atrophy or not. We got to grow food. This was the first edible food grown on the US side, I should say. It was romaine lettuce. And it was really fun to do that, actually have a garden and get to grow that. And we weren't supposed to eat it because it was the first food grown on it, but I have to admit some of it accidentally did float into my mouth and it tasted pretty darn good. But we also do, again, for the experiments on the human body, we did our eyesight because they're finding like 30–40% of the astronauts come back with major changes in their vision, trying to figure out why that is. And we found out like being in space is very similar just to growing old very quickly. We have our immune system goes bad, we have muscle loss, we have bone loss, we have all these issues that come on to as people age, the same thing, we just get a lot more quickly. And so if we can figure out how to mitigate that in space, we think we can help people on Earth too. And that's definitely something we look at. So the other big thing we spend our time on the space station is maintenance. We have to take care of this big spaceship. And I say, it is large and it has a lot of moving components. It has a lot of computer systems on board. Everything needs to be maintained to make sure things are working well. And so that's one of our jobs, is to basically be a tech and keep this thing going. And that was also fun for me. I like working with my hands, with tools, and that was good. You see that's a rack coming down, and that's on all four sides of all the US segments. And so you can move those around, but it shows you how much room is actually on board each one of those modules. It's pretty amazing. And the equipment was designed to be worked on mostly, and so it was really not too difficult to do it. And in space, you kind of have better access to things. One of the things we had to be really, quick about fixing, this is the toilet. And if that failed, it was very important to get that thing back up and working very quickly. We didn't really have the ability to go anywhere else. And so it was a high priority as soon as that thing failed. So maintenance on board was a large task that we had to do, but it was also enjoyable, and I liked it. And I say we worked from 7:30 in the morning to 7:30 at night, but we did get a time to work out during that 12-hour period. So that was kind of nice. And this just shows you just how busy the space station is with experiments going on. That was a US lab. And here, Reed and I are working on our spacesuits. We had to maintain these things for spacewalks that we were going to do. And the thing about these, they were not designed to be maintained in space, so they were always a little more difficult to do that. There were some good things I really liked about the science, and one of them was Robonaut here. So Robonaut is a robot that looks like a human, well, sort of. And I got to actually put on the legs and rebuild it. When it first came up, it just had the upper torso and the arms and the head, but it didn't have the capabilities that they wanted to for the final version. So when I got on board, I got to put on the legs, I said, and also redo all the internal systems, which really is just a big computer system, including the power, electrical, et cetera, on board. But I redid that. It took me about 2 weeks to rebuild this robot. And it was really fun for me. I really like doing that. I kind of like working on robots. I actually teach a class on that at Boise State. So I had a really good time with that one. And so when you're a guinea pig, though, there are some things that aren't as good when you're working on the science. About every 3 weeks, we had to take our blood and urine. That's not really a big deal. It's a little more difficult in space, I'll say. We have to do our own blood, and the urine can get a little difficult because everything floats. So that's always a little more interesting, I'll say that. But that was a minor, I would say, hassle for our life, not a big deal. Something that gets a little worse is a VO2 max test. We do this about once a month. They're just trying to see how your body's changing, which I agree with the science 100%. But it's one of those things where it's very difficult. You go to complete exhaustion. You're hooked up to breathing tubes. You got a nose plug on. You got a blood pressure cuff on, EKG going, and all this kind of stuff. It's really restricting in your ability to really work out well when you're doing it this way. And to me, the worst part though was you had to set it up and take it down yourself. So that was always kind of like, you had a torture equipment, and you were the one in the dungeon having to put it together and take it back down after they tortured you. And then the worst one, this was it by far. Now, we really didn't have this one in space, but we had something that was very similar to us, we thought. And what it was before you left and right after you came back, they wanted to determine if your strength loss was due to your muscles being weaker, or was it due to the neurosystem not working as well, so not firing the muscle as well. So the way they tested that, they put you in a chair, and it was a leg extension. So you wanted to try as hard as you could to push out on a bar that would measure how much you're pushing, how much force you're pushing on this bar. And then they could measure that. And then they would put electrodes on your thigh and shock you very much. And so you could see if there was any more force was actually there. They could figure out then how much is due to the neural system and how much is due just to your normal muscles. And so that was very painful, because to figure out where your max was, they had to keep turning up the voltage until you got to a max level. And they then wanted to make sure it was the max, so they kept going higher and higher to make sure you plateaued. By the time they got done with that, it was very painful of an experiment. And they had to do this over and over again to us. So we were not very happy with that one. But that's the bad side, I guess, of an astronaut. It's not too bad, but there was always negatives to being a guinea pig in the science world. Switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about the science that I call it science. I don't think this is really science. It's what well, I do think it's science, but it's kind of the fun we had with science. This is our own experiment we came up with, and it is, of course, a big ball of water. And it was actually quite difficult to make this ball of water and have it stay in one place, but we did it very carefully. The idea here is to put a GoPro camera inside the ball of water to see what that would be like, because that's something you really can't do on Earth, to get this ball of water and have something looking from inside of it looking out and to the air world. And so this was very difficult, or very different, I should say. And it's really, I think it's kind of a cool look, very much. I think you could do a PhD dissertation on the optics here. But I found what was really interesting is when I went to grab it, you'll see here, the camera, I wanted to point at one of my friends, is the stickiness of the water. The adhesion and cohesion of the water molecules is so strong in this environment that doesn't have, or you don't feel gravity, I should say. And it became so dominant that I felt I couldn't do much with it without breaking the water bubble apart. So I had to just be very gentle with it, and it slowly worked its way up my hand. And it being I could play with this water, I could have it on my arm actually and make it move up and down, rotate around my arm, and it wouldn't come off. It was kind of like this really sticky jello, but very loose jello at the same time. It was really kind of fun to play with. And we ended up doing this multiple times, because I ended up finding out water was really fun to play with this environment. One of the other times we did this, you see we made another ball of water. And I don't know if you noticed, one of the crewmates, his name was Alex right here. He's got a bald head. So we volunteered him to do this, which is to dive into the ball of water to see what that would be like. And so we did this. And you notice we're trying to be careful to make sure the water doesn't go everywhere. And we're doing our best at that. But if you look really closely, you can see that he is underwater. That water film is covering his whole face, his nose, his eyes, his mouth. And so he couldn't breathe. And we didn't realize that until he started choking, minor detail. But we helped him out. But it was kind of really fun to work on that and have fun with water. So that was kind of our own experiments we got to play with. And another thing I would like to talk about, because we all have to do with this, with dealing with mistakes. And it's not just on a space flight, but it's about life itself. And to me, it was very important for a space flight. And I got this kind of drilled into me, because on your first mission, you think you're going to be doing really well. You think you're not going to make a mistake. I got this, nailed. I have trained for a long time for this. I've done every procedure multiple times. I'm not going to make a mistake because I got it nailed. and you have this conception going in. And luckily I had a good commander and some other folks helped me out who on my first flight said, no, you are going to make mistakes and you got to learn how to deal with it and not get upset about it. You just have to figure out what you did wrong, why you did it, not let it happen again, and then forget about it. And you got 30 seconds to do that because you have another task coming up and you can't have your mind distracted while that happens. And so it was really interesting for me. So I had to really concentrate on this and it really worked on it. And it was true, you did make mistakes. And no matter how many times you practice something, it's a stressful environment, things are happening quickly, and you're just gonna make mistakes. And so it was good for me for my life to actually have this too, to be able to be, I think, objective about that and be able to just process it and then drop it and move on. And one of my biggest mistakes, I'll just give you a quick story here, is what we get to do after we land on a shuttle mission, and one of the perks we get to do is go see the President of the United States. After my first mission, we got to go see President Bush, be the second, George W. And it was really nice to do this. We got to go as a crew and we got to talk to him for a little bit, have some, a meal with him, et cetera. But then we had to do a photo op with our families. So our families were tagging along and we had this thing set up where it was in one of the rooms of the White House, where would be then the president and the first lady were standing there. And then each family would come in, take a picture with them and move on out. Right, no big deal. It was our turn to go. It was my wife and my youngest with me at this time. And we walk on in and President Bush is very happy, jovial. He comes across and he goes over and goes, hey, darling, this is my wife, gives her a big hug, does this whole, really just a very nice person kind of, but very, I guess, informal aspect to it. And so I go over to the first lady and I'm gonna go give the first lady a hug. And I realize about right here, like, this is not a good idea. This is not, you don't hug the first lady. This is wrong. Like I was smart enough to figure that out. And so then I realized, okay, I can't hug the first lady. And so I start dropping my hands a little bit, trying to be nonchalant about this. And then the camera's over on this side over here, and the guy shooting the camera goes, everybody smile. And so as I'm dropping my hands, I smile, and I realize when I take the picture, my hand was not at the right spot. So if you look at this was our Christmas photo for that year. You look at my left hand, it looks like it's in the wrong position. And I knew at the time, you can look at my face, God, this is gonna be bad. This could be used against me for a long time. But luckily I turned it in more into humor, hopefully, and let everybody learn that mistakes are okay. And it just happens. And you just got to deal with it and move on. And so that's what we did, send it out as our Christmas card for that year. Now, I'm sure you guys are doing the same thing too. You guys in a household where we're in isolation, you might have conflicts with the people you're living with. We had the same thing. We were on there, for 6 months, and just the same group kind of hanging out. And it ends up being, even you can go with the best friends, people you really like, and 6 months of living with them, stuck in the same area with them, working, doing everything with them, you can get some conflict built up, right? So we tried to figure out different ways to get rid of this conflict. And really ended up being that humor and playing was the best thing we came up with. So what I'm going to show you here is a little thing we came up with, and hopefully this video will all work and the sound will come through and you can just see a little game we came up with.
Up here on the ISS, we have arguments or disputes just like any other group of people would. And we like to handle them just like any civilized culture would handle them.
Of course, we talk them out like grown adults.
What? No, we duel!
Duel!
Duel! I'm gonna give you your weapon.
Woohoo! I've been waiting to shoot you for a long time.
That's right. And the game here, we both get one bullet. And we start at other ends of the module. And we float to each other. You get one shot, of course. First shot wins. However, if your shot misses, the other guy gets a point-blank one because he floats closer to you. So, we're gonna give it a try. He's been taking me off a little bit, so we have to do a duel.
Excellent.
See if you ruin my family name again. Winner!
Что это? Хорошая вещь.
I'm getting skinny.
Oh, I'm gonna take a long range shot right about now. Oh, right in the finger. buddy. 2 for 2. Nice shot, man.
All right, that's enough of that. I'm going to actually stop sharing, and I am ready to do some question and answers if everybody else is ready for that.
Great. And just a reminder to folks that are attending today, you can throw those questions into the Q&A section, and we'll have Caleb feed those to Steve. Steve, thanks for that. I love your comment about bringing humor and fun to those moments of conflict, and I know that's great advice that we all can take during this time. So appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, we'll get started on the Q&A. So one of the questions we got for Steve is that you mentioned that work starts at 7:30 a.m. What time zone is that in, and do other nations observe that same time zone on the space station?
Yeah, the space station is actually on GMT, so Greenwich Mean Time, which is London time. And so we live off that. And it was kind of interesting because it was really I wouldn't say a compromise. It was because when it first started off, it was Russian Space Agency and the United States working together. And they had to come up with what time zone to work on. And so you couldn't be either one of those because that would be the other person had won, right? You can't have that. So in negotiations, that was out. You couldn't have the time zone. So they compromised on something in between, which was GMT, and that was it was fine for us. We don't, once you're up there, it doesn't matter what time it is. We just go off whatever's on our laptop or our watch it says, and that's what our schedule works to.
Is there really like a night and day up there, or it's just
well, we get 16 sunrise and sunsets a day, so there is night and day. However, it's not something you can do to tell time from it all, right? And so that's, we have to just go off with the watch, I say.
That's fascinating. Our next question is, how is working out in space different than on Earth? Is there noticeable physical like capabilities that are different when you get back on Earth? Is there atrophy? Do the muscles look different? What's that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so working out is different on the space station. I actually am getting here, so working on my skills on this is there's 3 different pieces of equipment on board the space station. And one of them is a resistive exercise device, which is like lifting weights. The other is a treadmill. And the last one is an exercise bike. And so there are definitely, we have 2 cardio machines and one that is for lifting weights. And what I'm going to do here real quickly is I'm going to show those to you. And so hang on one second. We're going to try this again.
All right.
So this is the workout equipment. This is the resistive exercise device. And you do all the major lifts basically with it, from squats, deadlifts, bench press, etc. It does a pretty good job on the muscles you're hitting. However, you don't hit all the muscles. You don't do a lot of your core or anything like that, which is bad. And this is the treadmill. There's a harness that holds you down, right? And so you can see that going on right now. And this is the exercise bike. And it does not have a handlebars or a seat. It just is a pedal system. And you strap yourself in and pedal away on this. And so that's our kind of our way of doing it now. Differences on that, we did a cardio every day, and we did the resistive exercise device every day. And so so we, it was actually over 2 hours of working out every day. And the interesting about this was I worked out probably harder than I have in my whole life. And I like to work out, so it wasn't hard for me to do that. But 2 hours every day and hard workouts, and that was just to minimize my loss. Because I still came back with muscle loss, I still came back with bone loss, and I came back, my core was really weak. And so you're just doing all this work to just not be terrible when you get back. And it took me about 6 months to recover. And that was mainly my core was so weak when I first got back after the 6 months in space. I had to go through a bunch of rehab, and then I actually pushed it too hard at the beginning. and ended up having all sorts of issues with that. You know, guys imagine just like, you know, sore muscles locking up, all that kind of stuff, and had to then recover from that and then start again. And it ended up being a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but it all worked out. But it just took a lot of basically patience and working out and yoga and stretching. I hate to say it, but that's what I did a lot of, and it really helped.
Wow, that's really interesting. So is there like not a way to, like, do you have to work out an absurd amount to not really have a lot of loss at all, or?
Yeah, so they're finding out that's what you have to do, because really the rest of your day you are just floating. And they say if you don't work out, you'll lose 1 to 2% of your bone every month. And you know, I don't even know what is in for strength wise, but I got to imagine it's like being bedridden. They do bed rest studies, and if you're doing 6 months, you're going to come up that you can't even hardly walk after you get in bed for 6 months, right? So it's going to be really difficult strength wise to even walk. And so they know that, so they have to make sure that we work out hard just to be able to function when we get back.
That's fascinating. Next question is, what's your background that allowed you to have the opportunity to be an astronaut?
Oh man, good question. Okay. Engineering is my, I guess, profession I chose. So I'm an engineer. But I got lucky, and not only was I engineer, I was engineer for NASA. And in that aspect, I was an engineer on a shuttle training aircraft, so an airborne simulator of the shuttle. So I got flight operations. I got to learn to fly it with that. I did many hours of flying and simulations on that. I have over 6,000 shuttle approaches simulations, to say. So that really was a great experience for me in having both learning engineering and also operational skill set. And then I do have a PhD in computer science, which helped again, because I did all the software on board this aircraft for the control systems, navigations, the guidance, all that. I got to redo, and I really enjoyed that. It was, to me, one of the best jobs. Even almost day to day, it was probably better than being an astronaut, because you only get to fly. You know, 17 years of an astronaut, I flew 3 times. As an engineer, I flew probably 3 days every other week, and then did engineering the rest of the time. And it was something I was, you know, not only when I flew, I could see what was wrong, what worked well. I'd go back, I'd work on things to fix that. I could see the changes I made and see how, if they were actually helpful or not, and all that right away. And that was just a great, you know, to me, a feedback loop kind of thing. And it really, I don't know, I really enjoyed that aspect of engineering, to see your work and see how it improves everything, improves the simulation.
That's great. That's great. So we have a question about the bathroom on the space station, which I actually was curious about. So do you bring the waste back to Earth, or how do you do that? How's that handled?
Good question. So that waste all goes in a can, and you actually go in the can, right? There is a hole on the top, about this big on the top, and we put a rubber pouch in that has a kind of like with a rubber seal on it. We put around it, pop it in there. You float on top of this system, literally just a can, remember, so it's not much of a system. And I actually rigged up a bungee cord to hold me in place so I could read my iPad while I was doing this. And then you try to use the system, but the hardest part about this is there's no gravity to help separate the matter from your body and also keep it in place. It's going to float. So you have to put gloves on, and when you get, you know, done with certain parts of it, you have to float up, push everything back into the pouch as it floats away. You got to put it back in, and then clean everything up, and then put aerolayer wipes you use to clean everything up back in the pouch itself. You wrap the pouch up, put it into this can, and it takes about 8 to 9 days for a group of people to fill the can up. And it's always bad at the very last person having to shove the last little bit in. We seal it up. We put it down in part of the space station where trash goes. And then we put it on one of the cargo vehicles called a Cygnus, which burns up on reentry. So we have 2 cargo vehicles from the United States. One's a SpaceX, and that comes back safely, and all our science goes on that one. And then the trash goes on the Cygnus, and it burns up on reentry. So that's how we get rid of our trash, including our waste from the space station. And so, and it's really, we got lucky to see actually the space, the cargo ship was underneath us 2 days after we let it go, and we got to see it all burn up, and we filmed it actually doing that. It was really cool to get to see all your trash kind of go up into, you know, big flames. So, but that's what we do with it. We just burn it up in the atmosphere.
So Steve, that's the glamorous life of an astronaut right there.
Yes, it is. Exactly.
That's pretty interesting. I don't think I ever would have known that. Is there a language that is spoken on the International Space Station? Like is it English? Is it decided upon by all the countries going there? Like what language is the?
It's actually two languages we use. We use English and Russian on board. And so most of us are going up on the Soyuz. So you have to know Russian to go up on the Soyuz anyway. It's a Russian vehicle, and all the checklists, all the communications are all in Russian. So we have to learn Russian for that. And so speaking Russian is not a big part. And so when the Russians talk to their mission control in Moscow, they talk in Russian, even on the space station. Everybody else uses English, and we talk to all the other mission controls around the world, which would be one in Houston. There's our science one in Huntsville. There's one then in Germany and one in Japan. But they all use English too. So it's just English and Russian. And when you talk to your crewmates, it depends on the person you're talking to. And mostly with the Russians, you know them well enough to know, is my Russian better than their English? Then we'll go to Russian. But their English better than my Russian, and we'll go to English. Kind of thing. We just kind of work it out that way.
So does that apply to any other countries that are going up there as well? They have to know either English or Russian?
Yeah, they have to both know English and Russian. So that's another whole level for them. And I remember, I thought it was always difficult watching these people from basically like Japan who are learning Russian in English, right? And they also learn all the actual engineering side of the space station, all the classes we take, they are learning it in English also. And then having to process it all. Imagine learning a whole system like that in a foreign language. I mean, you have to know it really well, but I just can't imagine having to do all that, what they go through. That's just a whole nother added complexity of their training. And I was very glad I did not have to go through.
Oh, that's pretty fascinating. Next question we got is, do you have any hindsight, like when looking back, is there anything that your team, maybe that your team could have done differently to establish boundaries and cohesion?
To establish boundaries? Sorry, I missed the last bit.
Yeah, boundaries and cohesion.
Oh, boundaries and cohesion. Well, there's always some things you can do better, right? But we worked really hard prior to going to get to know each other, and then to talk about where our boundaries are and stuff like that, and how we're going to handle different situations. And we talk, and NASA actually kind of makes you do this. We have to go on a NOLS, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School course. We do it as a crew. We go on one of those, and we have to spend basically 10 days out in the woods, which is I like doing, so it's not hard for me. And the idea is you have to learn to work with each other, communicate with each other. They give you tasks to do, and you work on leadership skills and all these kind of things during these programs. But really, what you get to know is you get to know everybody really well, and that really helps tremendously. And then we also then talk about, like, okay, how are we going to handle going into, if somebody start to bug me, how are we going to handle the situation? We talked about how we need direct communication. We need to do all these things. So we try to handle all this stuff ahead of time, because we're not, we're not the first group going through this. But we really try to be really open. I think that's the big thing that it depends on the culture too, because some cultures, like in the US, we really aren't, sometimes we try to protect people's feelings a lot, and we don't say the truth. And that can lead to issues, I think, farther down the road, especially in a confined environment. So you have to be pretty much open and honest, but also being very objective in the way you receive your information, and try to look at it from the other person's side. And so it's really, one thing, I think when we do this is being really, in our society, trying to be very easy on other people and not really tell them the truth, although because they will get defensive. And that's the first thing you got to stop on your personal side, is never get defensive when somebody's trying to, not help you, but I think I call it as help me. They're finding a flaw that I might have or something that's bothering them, and they need to get it off their chest. I can't be defensive. That's the worst thing you could do, is just be defensive. We work on this, so don't be defensive. Try to be open-minded, objective about the whole situation, and we train this kind of thing. Now, can we improve on that? Sure. There's still times that it fell apart, And it ended up being more, to me, I realized it was Russian on Russian. That was the rest of us actually were working pretty well. There was 2 Russians that would get at it, and we had to go kind of separate them a couple of times, stuff like that. And because they didn't have that same training that we did. And that would be one thing in hindsight, I would have to bring them more into this training and get them more on our viewpoint of how to work with others.
Interesting. We got a question about the torture, which will be that's kind of going to be an interesting question. Kind of regarding that test, what was exactly the result supposed to be of that test, or what result of it? And then kind of bouncing off of that, what tests are done to determine that muscle loss?
Yeah, so as soon as we get back, we start doing tests of our body system, right? And the first thing you do after you land is this test to see if you can walk, how good your balance, all this kind of stuff. That's the first thing you do right after you land. And then for me, I had to get on an airplane and fly all the way back to Houston, where then, and as soon as I landed in Houston, I got 20 minutes with my family, and then I did 8 hours worth of tests. And that starts off on just strength tests too. And one of those tests was also this other test we're talking about, the one where you do your force sensor on that one. But right away, I'm in the gym. They're seeing how strong my muscles are, how much I can lift, all these kind of things. But of course, in protected modes, they know there's issues going on, so they're making sure I don't hurt myself at the same time. But they want to know really where you are, and how much you've lost in all your strength and stuff. When they record it right before you leave, and then they record it right when you come back, and they can measure then your muscle loss or your strength loss, I should say, and all these kind of things. And so they measure all that right away. And so that's how we know what we've done and how much we've lost over time. For me, it was interesting. I only lost probably strength-wise, depending on muscle group, but 5 to 10%. So I was pretty happy with that. And I actually, I did increase one, which was say my calf, because I don't, in my normal workouts, I don't do, toe raises or calf raises, however you want to call them, right? That isn't part of my workout, but it was part of our workout program on space. So that muscle group came back stronger than I left, but all the other ones dropped about 5 to 10%. What else? What was the second part?
Oh, I was just curious, kind of a follow-up to that. Like, is there an average amount that muscle usually
they
drops?
don't really tell us other people's scores. I'm sure there's actually papers out there, but it's all private data. But so when they put it in the papers, they make sure that you can't figure out who is who on the paper that way, right? That's part of being a subject on a human experiment. They want to make sure they can't distinguish which person it is. And so I don't really get to know other people's scores. I think that was that was a good score. And it kept some people, though, I don't think actually can come back better because they don't work out much on the ground. So those people always had good scores because they work out now more than they ever worked out before. And so they came out with probably better scores. But for somebody who works out, that was a good score.
Interesting. The other part of that question was regarding that torture test, the one you were talking about, the painful one. And what was the result of that?
I don't even know, honestly, because when I got done with that, I didn't want anything to do with those people. I just got up and left the room. It was like, I don't really care what the data said. I'm out of here. And so I never asked. I wish I probably now I'd want to know, but at that time, that's the last thing I wanted to do was talk to these people anymore.
And kind of going back to the question earlier about time zones, how was like the sleeping situation like? Did everyone have the same sleep schedules?
Yes, we all had the same sleep schedule, and we had our own little, we call them crew quarters, which are like a 3 feet by 3 feet by 7 feet kind of little area. And you had a way to close the door to that. And so you would just have your own little area, and you had a sleeping bag in there, and which was attached to the wall, or where floor ceiling, kind of however, which way the crew quarter was situated. And you would just float in there and go to sleep. And we had a laptop in there for our personal email and stuff like that. So that was kind of our own little private area, but that's where we slept. We all were on the same time.
All right. So this is going to be a great question. How do you address any kind of illness, minor or even serious, and what about mental health especially?
Well, okay, for normal physical health, we'll start with that one. That's the easy question, I guess. Is first, we have all sorts of meds and equipment on board, and we are trained as first responders as an astronaut. So the idea is we can get somebody stabilized, and then we have a doctor, we call them flight surgeons, that are down in mission control, and we would be calling them right away, and they'd be walking us through, telling us what procedure to go through and what to do. And so we don't really have to make the decisions. We're just going to be really the hands of the doctor. I already had it figured out if anybody got really sick or did something like that, because we can ship them down our video. So I'd put a camera up right on the person, you know, get them stabilized, get a camera up, and then ship that down to Houston and have the doctor start telling me what to do. And I would just follow his directions or her directions, whatever it happens to be. And that's what we're trained to do is basically, you know, so we can, you know, make cuts, we can suture, we can do all sorts of things. But but like knowing when to do it and not where to do it, I have no idea. So that would be up to the doctor to figure out for us what to do on that kind of situation. For minor stuff though, we just have like the standard meds you would have down here are things you can get, prescription or not, and stuff like that. So that's really for most cases like that, that's what we would do. As for mental illness, that's a good question. We have every 2 weeks you do a session with a psychiatric doctor. And they kind of, you know, just talk to you about anything you want to talk about, that kind of stuff. A lot of people like to unload on them on all sorts of things. I basically talk sports with them the whole time. And it was just, you know, it's up to what everybody needs to do. And we have that. And they're there to monitor. And really what they'll do is people will be able to monitor how you're doing it. So that's part of my crewmates, I guess, job is to monitor your other crewmates and see, you know, are they getting irritable? How they really, the big thing is I don't want people to be irritable with people on the ground when they talk on the radios to mission controls around the world. You have to be really kind of polite and speak to them in nice tones. And sometimes that could be difficult. And so that's when you start hearing that come on, you take somebody aside and talk to them about, hey, what's going on, that kind of thing. That's part of your job as a crew member. And so that's how kind of way we'd handle that. And if anybody was we thought it worse than that, I'd call the doctors up right away and then schedule a session for them to talk to the person and stuff like that. So that would happen. And none of my flights we ever had to have that issue before. So I really didn't have to go down that path, but that's what my plan was.
All right. At this time, we'll probably only do one more question, and then Matthew will take it away with the closing. Last question that we'll ask is, how was it decided to grow romaine lettuce specifically? And was it found to have the same amount of nutrients as romaine lettuce grown on Earth?
Yeah, you know, I don't know why they picked romaine lettuce. I wasn't in on that. It was a group of scientists, actually out of Florida, and they decided to grow romaine lettuce. And I don't know why really. But really what we were really testing on this whole equipment was the ability to grow food on the space station. So you probably noticed in one of those pictures I had, there was a box like this big with the artificial light in it and a way to close it all up. And that's where we had the plants growing inside there. But the difficult part about growing food in space was the soil. Right? You just can't have soil floating around. It just doesn't work that way, right? So we had these little pouches about this big of I'll call it soil, but I think they're like pellets of some sort of nutrients, right? And then the seed was actually in there, and I would just water that at the beginning with the light above it. And finally, after a few days, I would get a little seedling come out of it, and I would help that. And then after a little more of that, it could be multiple, and I just choose the biggest one, and we'll go with that one for each pouch, and it could have one plant growing out of it. And the issue we found though is that even though there's a slit on top of these pouches for the plant to grow through, that slit was big enough to have these nutrients or soil have little pieces come out of it though. So we had the area covered, but every time I had to go in there to work on or water the plants, I had to bring a vacuum with me. And first as I started opening up, I had to vacuum everywhere around to get up all this dirt / soil / nutrients and clean it all up before I could actually work. So I had to put actually goggles and a mask on so it wouldn't float in my eyes and mouth, etc., to do all this kind of work. And that was ended up being, we're trying to get better at that, but that's always been an issue of how to keep the soil from coming out and, you know, making everything dirty, having floating in the air, which anything floating in the air is bad for us. You can get in our eyes, lungs, etc. So that was the hardest part. But back to the romaine, no idea why. And all I know is it tasted really good. So I don't know if it had the same amount of nutrients or not, but I realized that when romaine lettuce by itself, it tastes really good. The rest of the food you're eating is really bad. So that was the key point I got out of that one. So I assume from what I got, though, there was no issues with it. It would seem to be just like one grown on the ground.
Very good. Well, Steve, can't thank you enough for taking time to provide this lecture. This was our first one, and I hope the folks that were able to join us enjoyed it. I know I certainly did. I learned a few things, and I know Caleb probably did as well. Before we wrap up, though, I did see one more question here that I think is fitting for us to end on, and that I'd ask you, Steve. You know, all of us, I think, are wondering and looking forward to what normal life starts to look like as we go forward. When you were returning from space back to Earth and back to quote unquote normal life, what'd you look forward to the most upon that return?
Well, it's a good question. The first thing, of course, is family, right? I hadn't seen my family, and now, because really when you go away, you don't see them, you leave Houston 6 weeks prior to your launch. So it's now over 7 months since really you get to see them. And so that was really good to get back and just to, to be with them again. That was wonderful. But the second thing besides that was good food for me. That was such a huge issue, having, food that doesn't taste so good, and also the same food then over and over again. We had basically our meals were pretty much on a schedule. So every week it was the same amount of food, same type of food, everything like that. So it didn't change much on what you ate. And so that, any kind of fresh, good food. I had a whole list of restaurants I was going to go, stuff I was going to cook, everything. I had this thing going, man. And so that's what I did for like the first 30 days, was just eat different things to get that, all that kind of taken care of. And then I was okay.
Well, that's fantastic. I think, that's a reminder that even what we're dealing with now and what we have to look forward to, family's important, friends are important, and having good food, which I think we're all doing at home now. So Steve, again, thank you so much. Bronco Nation, thanks for joining us today. This was our first one. Be on the lookout for future virtual lectures with some of our other fantastic and amazing faculty. And Caleb, I hope you'll join us if we do some more in the future as well. Really appreciate you being here today. There will be a survey that goes out. You should either receive it right when you close out your session today or in a follow-up email. We debated and chose not to send you any sort of test like Caleb's getting after his lectures, but appreciate any feedback you have for us through that survey. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and go Broncos. Thanks, Caleb and Steve.
Take care. Thank you.